The early morning fog clung to the training grounds like a silent warning as recruits moved with heavy footsteps across the cold dirt, each of them driven by pride, fear, or desperation. But among them walked a woman whose presence drew whispers and smirks. Her name was Elena. And though her eyes held fire, the others only saw someone who did not belong. They doubted her strength, doubted her purpose, doubted that she could survive what was coming. Yet she kept walking, ignoring their words, focusing only on the beating of her heart, because deep inside she knew something they did not, and it terrified them even if they pretended not to care. But soon the moment would come when their doubt would turn to disbelief, and that moment was already on its way, leaving the air thick with tension, as if the ground itself waited to reveal a secret that no one was ready to face. Yet something darker was approaching, and no one could stop it. The instructors barked orders with voices sharp, as steel forcing the recruits into brutal drills that tested stamina, speed, and pain tolerance. Bodies collapsed, knees shook, and lungs burned. But Elena did not fall. She pushed through every obstacle with silent determination, her movements controlled, her focus unshaken, and while others gasped for breath, she only stared ahead as if every harsh command was nothing more than an echo. But her quiet strength unsettled the men around her because they could not understand how someone they underestimated so heavily could endure what they struggled to survive. They watched her with growing confusion and hidden unease, sensing that there was more to her than met the eye, something powerful, something dangerous, and it was only a matter of time before it would be unleashed in a way that none of them could predict. But the day was far from over, and the true challenge had not even begun. When the first combat evaluation began, the recruits formed a wide circle on the open field, the dirt beneath. Them scarred by countless battles and failures, each participant was expected to show their potential in hand-to-hand combat and prove that they deserved to be there. The stronger ones stepped forward, eager to dominate the weaker ones held back. Hoping to avoid humiliation, and in the center of it all, Elena stood in silence, waiting. No one wanted to face her, not because they feared losing, but because they believed fighting her was pointless. They thought she would crumble at the first hit. So they laughed and mocked her presence, yet as her name was called and she stepped forward, the atmosphere shifted slowly as if the air itself sensed danger even before the recruits did, because something inside her stirred like a storm rising. From the depths, ready to break everything in its path, and once the battle began, there would be no turning back. Her opponent, a tall recruit with broad shoulders and a cruel grin, attacked with reckless confidence. He lunged forward, expecting an easy victory. But in a flash, Elena moved faster than anyone had seen. She sidestepped. His blow grabbed his arm and sent him crashing to the ground with a force that made the watching crowd fall silent. The recruit groaned in shock, unable to understand how he had been defeated so quickly, and as he struggled to stand, Elena simply stepped back. Her expression unreadable, the silence around her grew heavier. Disbelief spread through the ranks like wildfire, and for the first time the others looked at her not with mockery, but with caution, yet their pride would not let them accept the truth. They convinced themselves it was luck, a mistake, something that would not happen again. But deep inside, fear began to twist in their chests, because they had seen a glimpse of her real strength, and they knew that this was only the beginning, and the real threat was still hidden. Word of her victory spread across the training base in minutes, and soon even the instructors took notice. They watched her more closely, each day observing every movement, every decision, every moment. She remained calm under pressure while others broke apart, and they realized something the recruits refused to see. She was more disciplined than any of them, more precise, more dangerous. But instead of praising her, the higher-ups remained silent, their eyes unreadable as if they were waiting for the perfect moment to reveal a test worthy of her capabilities, and that silence felt like the calm before a storm, the kind of storm that could shatter everything in its path. because deep within the command unit, one man had already taken interest in her, and his reputation was enough to make even the bravest soldiers tremble. But Elena did not know that her greatest challenge was no longer the mockery of her peers. It was the attention of someone far more powerful and far more ruthless, and the day he stepped forward would change everything in ways no one could escape. Yet, as night fell over the base and darkness swallowed the sky, Elena remained awake, sitting on the cold ground, listening to the distant echoes of gunfire and training drills. Her mind traveled back to a past filled with pain and sacrifice memories. She never spoke of secrets she carried alone. Every scar on her body told a story of survival battles fought in silence, wars no one knew she had endured. She was forged in hardship, shaped by loss, and driven by something deeper than pride. She was not here to prove herself to them. She was here because of a promise that demanded strength, loyalty, and unbreakable will. And as she stared into the darkness, she felt a shift in the air, as if destiny itself was drawing closer, preparing to drag her into the spotlight she never wanted, but could no longer avoid, because sooner than anyone expected, a command would echo across the base calling her name in a way that made the ground tremble. And when that command arrived, everything would spiral into a confrontation that would shake the entire battalion, and the one waiting for her on the other side was a man. No one dared to challenge, yet she would face him without fear because the time for doubt was ending and something far greater was about to begin. The sun had barely risen. When the entire battalion was called to the main field, the air was sharp with cold, but the weight of the announcement pressed heavier than the morning frost. Every recruit stood in formation, their eyes fixed forward, though many of them were secretly searching for her. Elena stood in the final row, silent and steady, her presence no longer ignored, but heavily watched. Whispers moved through the ranks like restless wind. They said the commander himself was coming, the one whose authority was absolute, the one who never tolerated weakness, and if he was involved, something serious was about to unfold. Tension coiled around the field like a serpent ready to strike. And as the distant hum of footsteps grew louder, everyone felt their heartbeats stumble, because the man approaching was the kind of storm that destroyed everything in its way, and none of them were prepared for what he intended to do next. Commander Ryland stepped into view, his gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. His reputation was legendary not just for his skills, but for the way he broke even the strongest soldiers with his brutal training methods. No one dared to speak when he stood before them. His presence demanded silence and fear. But instead of addressing the entire battalion, his eyes locked onto Elena with unsettling precision, as if he had come only for her. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances, confused and afraid, wondering why he would focus on someone they had doubted just days ago. The air thickened with dread as Ryland finally spoke, his voice deep and controlled. He announced a special evaluation, one that would determine who truly deserved to wear the uniform, and he declared that Elena would be the first to face it, leaving everyone frozen with disbelief as the challenge hung in the air like a blade about to fall. Elena stepped forward without hesitation, her expression calm. Though the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet, she could feel the stares digging into her skin, half of them hoping she would fail, the other half terrified that she might actually succeed. Commander Ryland watched her with unreadable eyes, as if he was searching for a weakness buried beneath her steady posture. He circled her slowly like a predator testing his prey. Then he gave a command that sent chills down every spine. Prepare for full contact evaluation. No restrictions, no limits. It was a test that had broken countless soldiers before her, a test no one had ever volunteered for. Yet Elena nodded with silent acceptance, and that alone unsettled the entire battalion, because no one could understand why she did not flinch, why she did not fear the man who had crushed the strongest warriors in the unit. And as the circle formed around them, the tension became unbearable, as everyone waited for the first move that would decide everything. But instead of attacking right away, Commander Ryland spoke again, his words laced with intimidation. He asked her why she was here, why she continued, despite being doubted, mocked, and underestimated. His voice was calm, but his eyes held the promise of pain. It was not a question. It was a provocation, a way to break her spirit before the fight even began. Yet Elena did not answer. She simply stood there, silent like a mountain unshaken by the storm. Her refusal to speak made several recruits gasp. No one disobeyed the commander and lived without consequences. Ryland stepped closer, his presence overpowering the shadows, lengthening behind him, but even then she did not move or tremble. And for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but interest, as if he recognized something familiar in her resolve, something dangerous that reminded him of a warrior he had once known, and that realization made the air grow colder because whatever came next would not be simple training. It would be war. Without warning, Ryland struck his movements, lightning fast, his attack aimed to knock her down. In a single blow, but Elena shifted with deadly precision, avoiding his strike by inches. The crowd tensed, watching with disbelief as she countered with speed that no one had seen before. She did not overpower him, but she redirected his force using technique and instinct honed from something far beyond standard training. Each movement was fluid, controlled, efficient. The battalion watched with wide eyes, unable to understand how she was keeping up with him. The commander pressed harder his strikes, ruthless and unrelenting, but Elena adapted with every motion, responding not with fear, but with focus. And the more she fought, the more the tension in the air transformed into something electrifying, because slowly the recruits began to realize the impossible. She was matching the commander strike for strike, and no one knew how long that balance would last before something shattered. Sweat dripped from faces in the watching circle as the battle intensified. Each strike echoed like thunder. Across the field, the earth trembled with each impact. Airbursts followed every collision. But Elena did not slow down. She moved with a rhythm that felt almost inhuman, tapping into a level of endurance they had never witnessed before. Commander. Ryland narrowed his eyes, testing her with even greater force, yet with every attack she adapted faster. As if her body remembered battles far more brutal than this one, panic and awe spread like wildfire among the recruits. The same people who once doubted her now stared with shaken fear because she was becoming something unstoppable, but amid the chaos, Elena could feel it too. The energy rising inside her, burning like a hidden flame, begging to be unleashed. And though she controlled it tightly, she knew that if she let go, there would be no turning back, and the battlefield would never be the same. Then, in the midst of the clash, Ryland paused, stepping back just enough to make everyone freeze. Confusion spread as he lowered his fists slightly, and stared at her as if trying to solve a puzzle. His voice dropped to a low tone when he asked her a single question. One that silenced the wind who trained you. The recruits frowned, unable to understand why he would ask such a thing. But Elena did not answer once again. Her silence spoke louder than any words. The commander's eyes hardened, not with anger but with certainty. He had seen this skill before, not among ordinary soldiers but among elites, the kind born from war, not training, and his suspicion stirred something dangerous deep within him. The battalion sensed the shift, but they did not know what it meant. They only felt the air growing heavier, the pressure building like a storm preparing to unleash destruction. And as Ryland took one final step toward her, it became clear that he was about to escalate the fight to a level no one could survive unless they were more than human. And Elena stood ready, because she knew the next moment would decide everything. And the true battle was only about to begin. The field had fallen into a silence so deep it felt unnatural. As Commander Ryland stood face to face with Elena, his eyes sharpened with a new level of intensity that made even the toughest soldiers shift uncomfortably. No one dared to move or speak. The battalion stood frozen, waiting for the next moment with bated breath. because they all sensed the shift in the commander's aura. This was no longer a test. It was something far more dangerous. Rylan rolled his shoulders, and the air around him grew heavy, his presence pressing down like a crushing weight. And though Elena stood calm, the atmosphere pulsed with tension, each heartbeat louder than the last, as if the earth itself was preparing for impact, because what was coming would not be a simple clash. It would be the breaking point that would reveal everything. Rylan launched forward with a force none of them had ever seen before his movements, a blur of lethal precision, every strike carrying the weight of years of combat meant to overwhelm and destroy. She met his speed with flawless timing, her body weaving through each blow like water parting around stone. Their attacks collided with explosive power, sending bursts of wind across the field. The ground cracked beneath their feet as they fought with more intensity than any training session had ever allowed. The recruits watched in disbelief, torn between fear and awe, because this was no ordinary soldier against commander. This was two forces of nature colliding, neither yielding, neither hesitating, and with each clash, the truth grew harder to ignore. Elena was not simply surviving. She was adapting and growing stronger with every exchange, and that realization unsettled even the commander, as he drove forward searching for her limit. But he could not find it, and that alone sparked something dangerous within him. Sweat glistened across tense faces in the watching crowd as they struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Some of them had trained for years, dreaming of reaching even a fraction of the commander's level. Yet this woman they had mocked just days before was standing toe-to-toe with him without faltering. One recruit whispered that it was impossible. Another said she had to be hiding something, but none of them could deny what they saw with their own eyes. The power behind her movements, the precision in her reactions, the unshakable focus in her gaze. Each step she took felt calculated, honed by experience that no ordinary training could provide. And the more she fought, the more the commander changed his attacks, sharpened faster, more strategic, as if he too knew this was no longer about dominance. It was about discovery. And as their battle raged on, the air trembled with the weight of secrets still hidden, then with a ferocity that made the entire battalion flinch. Rylan unleashed a devastating strike aimed at her center mass, a blow that had shattered ribs and ended careers in a single hit. But Elena moved just before impact, her instincts igniting like lightning, and she countered with a technique so advanced only those who had stared at death could have mastered it. She redirected his power and sent him sliding back across the dirt. Disbelief exploded across the crowd. Jaws dropped, eyes widened, and breath escaped in stunned silence, because no one had ever forced Commander Rylan to retreat, not once. In all the years he had trained warriors, yet Elena stood there, her posture unbroken, her eyes steady as if she had expected this outcome all along. Rylan rose slowly, his expression unreadable, but in his gaze there was no anger, only certainty. And that certainty promised that the battle was about to evolve into something far more intense than anyone was prepared to witness. He straightened his stance and removed his combat jacket, tossing it to the ground as a low murmur rippled through the ranks. The commander never removed his jacket unless he was fighting at full. Power, which meant everything so far, had only been a test. Now his muscles tensed. His presence doubled in weight, and even the air seemed to bend around him. Several recruits stepped back unconsciously as if their bodies understood the danger before. Their minds did, but Elena did not move. She simply adjusted her footing as if welcoming the escalation. Her calmness unsettled even the bravest soldier, because no one else would stand so fearlessly in front of the commander when he was serious. Rylan narrowed his eyes, studying her with new respect, but also with a hunger for the truth. And in that haunting silence, it became clear that he intended to break through her defenses, not just to win, but to uncover whatever power she was hiding. And the battalion braced themselves as the commander surged forward like a storm unleashed. The ground exploded beneath his steps. Each strike came with crushing force, leaving shock waves that rippled through the air. Elena responded with unparalleled precision, meeting his strength with fluid movement. Every motion, deliberate, efficient, lethal. Each impact thundered across the field, echoing through the hearts of everyone watching. They could not believe the scale of power unfolding before them. It felt less like training and more like war, yet neither of them backed down. Their clash created a rhythm of chaos and control, their bodies reacting faster than thought, their instincts guiding them with terrifying clarity, and in that relentless exchange something shifted. The commander began to smile, not with arrogance but with recognition, as if he had finally found an opponent worthy of his full potential. And as his smile grew, the recruits felt a chill, because if this was only the beginning of his true strength, then the battlefield was about to transform into something beyond their understanding. Still, Elena did not waver, while others saw danger. She saw opportunity. Every strike he threw revealed more about his style, his timing, his weaknesses. She absorbed everything, adapting faster and faster until their movements looked less like combat and more like a deadly dance. Her eyes burned with focus, her breathing steady despite the chaos, and in that moment the battalion finally understood she was not just strong, she was experienced beyond anything they had known, forged by battles far harsher than this training ground could offer. There was a history in her movements, one she kept buried, one that shaped her into a warrior. Unlike any they had faced before, the air thickened with anticipation, as the energy between them surged, rising higher and higher, like a wave on the edge of collapse. And when that wave finally crashed, it would destroy everything in its path. Then the commander shifted his stance into a form that no one recognized, a stance reserved for the most elite black operations, a style used only in missions where failure meant death. The recruits gasped in disbelief, because if he was using that technique, it meant he believed she could handle it, or he believed she was dangerous enough to require it. Elena stared at him unfazed and slowly mirrored his stance, shocking even the commander. His eyes widened. Not with fear, but with realization, and something like old memory flickered behind them, because only a handful of warriors in the world knew that stance, and each of them had been shaped by the same brutal origin. This was no coincidence, it was revelation. And as the truth lingered unspoken in the air, the tension reached its breaking point, because from this moment on, it was no longer a test, no longer a competition. This was personal, and the next move would expose everything. The world was never meant to see, and the battalion held its breath as the final clash approached with unstoppable force, ready to tear open the secrets buried in the past and reveal the storm waiting in the shadows. The tension around the field wrapped around every recruit like chains as Elena and Commander Ryland stood motionless, mirroring the same forbidden stance. The air held its breath. The earth trembled beneath their feet, and even the wind dared not move for years. Rumors had whispered of this stance, a technique only used by warriors forged in blood-soaked missions where survival meant becoming something beyond human. The battalion could not comprehend what they were seeing. But Commander Ryland understood, and that understanding flashed through his eyes with a fierce certainty. He knew exactly what kind of world she came from, and now he needed to know why she was here, because someone with that level of training did not simply appear in a standard unit without a reason that reached far above them all. And as the silence deepened like a gathering storm, the ground shook with the weight of what was about to happen next. Ryland struck first, unleashing a level of power that sent cracks ripping through the earth. His movements, no longer restrained by training formality. This was raw, refined combat meant to dismantle minds and bodies alike. Elena met each attack with flawless precision, her instincts guiding her through the chaos like shadows weaving through light. The clash created shockwaves that forced the nearest recruits to stumble back in fear, their vision blurred from the sheer speed of the exchange. They were witnessing history, something that defied logic. The commander was fighting with lethal intent, and still, she matched him. Each impact thundered across the field, rattling bones and shattering the last of their doubts. But beneath the explosive force there was something else rising, an unspoken recognition between them, like two warriors who had walked through the same fire and survived. And that recognition made their clash even more intense, because it was no longer just about strength. It was about truth. Then, in a split second, Rylan shifted his stance again, this time combining speed and power. In a way that made even the ground recoil, Elena dodged by inches, but the force grazed her shoulder. Cutting through her uniform, drawing the first sign of blood, the battalion inhaled sharply, expecting her to falter. But instead, she stood taller, her eyes burning with a silent fury. Not of anger, but of awakening. Something inside her snapped free, breaking the restraint she had held on to since the beginning. Her movements changed no longer, merely responding, but dominating with terrifying grace. She seized the momentum, closing in on Rylan with speed that left afterimages in the air. Each strike landed with precision, threatening to overturn the fight entirely. And in that moment, the commander finally saw it. The full weight of what she had been hiding, and the memory of where such deadly instincts were born resurfaced in his mind like a ghost he could never forget. A name from the past flickered in his thoughts, a covert program buried deep in classified files, a program that created soldiers so lethal they were considered living weapons, a program that was rumored to have been shut down because it was too dangerous. But what if it never ended? What if someone survived? His eyes locked onto Elena with a mixture of shock and undeniable certainty, and he knew she was not just strong, she was one of them. One of the ghosts of that shadow unit forged in silence, erased from history. And if that was true, then her presence here meant something far greater than personal ambition. It meant someone placed her here for a reason, and that reason could either save them all or destroy everything they stood for. The weight of that realization hit him harder than any strike, and as she advanced with unstoppable force, he knew he could no longer hold back any pieces of the truth, and he had to push her to the limit to know where her loyalties truly lay. Their next collision split the air like lightning. The force of their clash sent a tremor through the entire battalion. Several recruits dropped to their knees from the pressure, unable to withstand the overwhelming surge of power. Elena and Rylan remained locked in combat, neither yielding, neither slowing, and yet something had changed. The commander was no longer trying to break her. He was testing her, confirming what he already suspected. Their eyes met in the midst of the storm, and in that instant an unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. But before either could react, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the field, interrupting the battle. A group of high-ranking officers approached, their uniforms marked with authority beyond the base level, their expressions grim, their eyes fixed directly on Elena, and the atmosphere shifted once again, growing even colder, as if a new threat had arrived, one that even the commander did not fully control. The officers stopped at the edge of the field, and the one in front spoke with a voice edged in steel. His words cut through the silence. Elena, stand down. Your presence has been requested by higher command immediately. The battalion stared in confusion. Higher command never interfered with training exercises and certainly never summoned a single recruit, but the commander understood at once, and his jaw tightened, because he knew if they were stepping in, then the truth was closer to surfacing than ever before. Elena did not move at first, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the new arrivals. But then slowly she lowered her guard. Turning to face them with calm composure, the officers signaled for her to follow, but the shift in their formation revealed something more. They were not escorting her. They were surrounding her as if she were a threat that needed containment, and that alone told the entire story. Something about her identity had reached those in power, and now they were afraid of what she might reveal. And as Elena took her first step forward, the ground beneath all of them felt unstable, because whatever was coming next would not just affect her, it would drag the entire battalion into the storm of secrets waiting to be unleashed, and the real battle was only beginning. The officers closed in around Elena, their formation tight and strategic as if they were escorting a dangerous prisoner rather than a recruit. The battalion watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend why someone who had just matched the commander in combat was being treated like a threat. Commander Ryland stepped forward, his voice sharp with authority, demanding to know under whose orders they were taking her. The lead officer hesitated before answering a single name that made the air turn ice cold. A name none of the recruits recognized, but one the commander clearly did. His eyes darkened with fury, because that name belonged not to leadership, but to the shadows of the military, the ones who operated above all rules, the ones who created monsters and erased heroes, the ones who built the program Elena came from. And suddenly, everything made sense and nothing was safe anymore. Elena paused, her gaze locked on the officers, then on the commander, as if silently asking whether she should comply or fight. Ryland held her eyes for a long moment, and in that silence, an understanding passed between them. They were no longer opponents. They were soldiers bound by the same truth, the same past, and the same enemy. The commander stepped forward, placing himself between her and the officers, his voice low but unshakable. "If you want her, you go through me." The battalion gasped. The officers stiffened, but before they could respond, Elena moved with calm resolve, stepping beside Ryland instead of behind him. Shocking everyone, she did not need protection. She chose to stand as an equal, and in that stance she revealed her decision. She would no longer hide who she was, no matter the consequences. The lead officer signaled more soldiers to move in, forming a perimeter around the field, ready to force compliance. But the battalion who once doubted her now stepped forward one by one, forming a wall behind Elena and the commander. Their eyes burning with defiance, they had seen her strength, her loyalty, her unstoppable will. And even if they did not understand her past, they knew she was one of them, and they would not let her be taken without a fight. Tension crackled through the air as two forces stood ready to collide, the shadows of the past against the strength of the present, and for one heartbeat everything stood still. Then Elena took a single breath, her voice calm, yet carrying the weight of every battle she had survived. "If they want a war," she said, "then let them see what we are truly capable of." And in that moment, the storm finally broke and the world would never be the same.